Hi, welcome to the Position Mat demo. So we'll start by going through quickly what the plugin can do. So this is a quick render I've done out of 3D. It's not too fancy, but it's enough to show what our plugin's capable of doing. It's just got a shiny sphere floating through space. Pretty cool, bit Tron-y. And here's what we can do with it. It's a bit over the top just to show some of the different features. All of this is handled with our plugin. It's just taking a position pass and applying some various effects for color correction and animation. We'll jump in and have a quick look through what the different parameters are, and then we'll go through what we can do with it. So for starters, this is what a position pass is. So this is basically 3D data representing this scene that we've rendered out. So in this pass, each color value, R, G, and B, corresponds to an X, Y, and Z coordinate. If we turn on individual channels, like say green, this is our Y-axis. You can see these values, they're corresponding to basically a height map. If we go into our demo scene, we've got our position. So if we select our effect, let's get our position mat, apply effect, Tillman position mat, you can see we get a circle. Now, basic controls here are we can scale this, feather it, move it around, but we'll go through the different modes first and then we'll jump into looking at what each of these parameters does. So to start with, we've got a circle, just gives us a radiating sphere in space. Ring gives us a ring. Square gives us a cubic volume. Box, cubic volume but outlined. Grid, fairly self-explanatory. Radial, some radial rings. And rays. Which, when we pump up this frequency, we'll see what they do. So, just giving some rays in space. Alright, let's look at the different parameters. To start with, we've got this pick point here. We turn off our effect. We can color pick anywhere in here. Say this point in the back corner here. Select that, we get that orange looking color. We turn our effect back on, and we can see that our mat is now in that corner. Do it again, test it. Let's try over here on the left hand side. And our mat's now there. So that basically allows you to pick any point in space fairly easily and let that be the center of your mat. It makes it a bit simple as opposed to having to come in and try and dial in specifically where you want. You can just go and pick a point. We've got our position, which lets us shift our mat around, move it wherever we like. You can see it even goes behind objects, so you can see if we turn on our layer here, you can see that's behind that pillar, and that's occluding that as it should. Radius lets us scale this mat up. Feather, let's just soften that out. Scale X, Y, and Z. Now these basically are going to squash and stretch our X, Y, and Z axes. So if I pull up the X, you'll see that we start squashing the X-axis so that we can distort this circle a bit. If we set this to 0, we actually get an orthographic projection. And what that means is we're basically ignoring the X-axis now. So if we shift along this X position, you'll see nothing's happening because all of the X coordinate values are the same. And this kind of gives us a almost like a cylinder in space, just projecting straight down from that X-axis. And we can do that on any of the axes. So if we reset this back, if I set my X scale to 0 and my Z scale to 0, now we're basically only using the Y. We're sort of filling an entire region. And that could be useful for quickly selecting a whole volume. Multiply values, this is mainly useful if you have a really large scene scale. So if I turn my radius up here, you'll see if I set this radius to 5, this outer rim of this circle here is 5 units, 5 scene units away from the center point, wherever this position is. So this point here is exactly 5 points away from here. If you have a really huge scene scale, you don't want to be pulling this slider up a lot. Like, it's quite easy at this scene scale. I can pull from here to here, and we're expanding the circle quite easily. But if you wanted to get it here and your scene scale was such that this point on the rim is about 5 or more hundred units away from the center, it would be a bit tedious to be dragging this slider like that. So basically what this does is just multiplies that value. So this is going to be multiplying your radius and feather values for if you have either a really huge or a really tiny scene and you want to make it easier to deal with these sliders. Invert, pretty self-explanatory. Alpha matte, this basically toggles between a luma matte or an alpha matte. So if I turn my layer on under here, you can see currently it's alpha matte, so anything outside of the matte is 0 alpha, and that allows you to just overlay layers really simply. If we check that off, you'll see now it becomes a luma matte. So if we want to do the same thing, we basically just have to set that mode there to add, and now it's working as it was before. Couple of quick things to note. You'll see if I start having high contrast areas, so if I move this matte behind one of these columns and bring up the radius, you'll see in here I start getting some really pixelated values, some aliasing on the edge there. If you want to avoid that, you want to keep your feathering quite high. That helps a bit too. There's always going to be some amount of that. It's really based on your anti-aliasing settings in 3D or your resolution. Best way to avoid it is make sure you've got this alpha matte checked, and add effect, matte, simple choker, and just make a 1 pixel choker, and that'll get rid of those artifacts there. Other thing to point out is this scene is in 32 bits per channel. So if I solo my position layer, turn off these effects, you'll see if you look in the upper right hand corner in the info panel, we've got negative values and we've got over bright, like above 1 values. Now this is required to be in 32-bit because of those values. If I show turning it down to 8-bit or 16-bit, you'll see we're losing all of that data. So it has to be in 32-bit. Also, we want to make sure we're in a linearized workspace. If I turn this back on, we go to our color management. Working space is set to RGB. Linearized workspace is on. If we turn that off, or if we set this to no working space, we end up with some weird color interpolation. And that's basically a color space issue where we're not reading the exact coordinates we want because After Effects is warping the color space when it brings it in. A couple of ways to avoid that. One is we can apply effect utility color profile converter before our matte and output to linear. Another method is grab our position render, interpret footage, change our values in here. So if we tick on this preserve RGB, that'll work as well. So it's up to you which way you want to approach it. I'd say it's probably easier just to make sure you're in linear workspace in here. That's how generally you want to do your 3D compositing anyway. All right, let's get stuck into what we can do with some of these things. So say you want to do some color grading to this scene. We want this back area maybe to be a bit darker, like it's falling off into shadow or something like that. We can grab our, make an adjustment layer, effect, add a curves adjustment. We can just really pull that in, make it really dark. We grab our position matte, set this to square, size it out, shift it back to where we want it, feather it a bit because we don't want it to be so harsh. You can see we've now got that area selected quite nicely. If we scrub through, we'll see that it's sticking to the camera. That's nice. And now we just want to set that to be an alphabet with our layer. So take our adjustment layer. Take our adjustment layer, set it to be an alphabet of this. And now if we toggle that, you can see what's happening. We're darkening that area. Probably want to shift it back a little bit more. Increase that Z size a bit. There we go. And now we're darkening that whole side. Alternatively, we can brighten it up as well, or let's say we do it with the other side. So let's shift our matte back. So we're selecting just this side. Feather it out even more. Let's make it a circle. It might make it look a bit nicer. Chuck it to that corner. Now we can fill this with whatever color we like. Red, why not? Default. And add that on. You see now we're color correcting just that area. So it's really simple to select entire sections of your scene and tweak the colors really simply. If we want to do some more motion graphics-y style or animation type stuff, that's simple too. Let's reset this. You can see we've got some cool floor detail in here, and that means that we can do something tricky here. So if we grab our, let's keep it a circle for now, we set our scale X and scale Z to 0, you can see we're selecting the whole floor. Feather that out, turn our radius down, you can see we start seeing some of that detail in there. I need some really small values to get this selected how we want it. There we go. You can see now we've got all the cracks between those hexagons selected and the really low level ones as well. Let's fill that with something. Let's go the Tronny blue color. Nice. Then we can mask that with something else as well. So say we duplicate that, reset it. Now we've got our circle. Make an alpha matte. Then we can really easily just animate this radius. You can see we can go into negatives, and that way you can shrink down to until it's not appearing anymore. Now we'll scale it up. And we'll set this to ring. It'll wipe on and off. Okay, so we get a cool transitional effect there. That's kind of nice. If I turn off this shy layer, let's get rid of these ones for now. Don't need those anymore. Reset this matte here. So you can see we've got I've got a camera and I've got a null from my 3D scene. We don't really need the camera, but I've got it there just to show you that the null is lining up with this sphere floating around. And if we look at the position, we can see we've got all that data. And these coordinates here will line up to our position map, almost. And you'll see how close that is in a second. So if I make an expression here and pick whip to our position, you can see it's not really doing anything right now, but if we scrub to here, you can see that as the sphere is lowering, we start getting the matte coming up through the floor, and it also looks like it's on the wrong side of the room. Now basically what this is the Maya coordinate system and After Effects coordinate system are slightly different, and you'll find it will vary between packages, but in this case, basically we've just got to flip the Y and Z axes. So all we need to do is we make that a variable. Don't be scared of this expression, it's quite simple. You can just copy it directly if you need. So basically what we're saying is we're taking the coordinates of our null, and all we need to do is put a negative in front of the y and a negative in front of the z. Now we've flipped the z and y axes, and you can see that's locked exactly to our sphere. You see we're getting some of that aliasing again, so let's just add our simple choker. That's gone. So this is kind of cool. It's like our sphere is lighting the scene. If we turn our feather up, turn our radius up, you can see that's trailing along with the thing as it goes through. So you can make some pretty cool effects with that. Something that I think is quite cool as well is if we take this expression and replace the y coordinate with 0, what we end up with is basically a shadow on the ground. So this is now exactly where our sphere is, but it's locked to our ground position. That means that we can replace that with whatever we like. We can fill that with black if we want. Make it into an actual shadow. Darken the area underneath it. Or sticking with the drum theme, let's light it blue. And you can see that if we crank it up, we start to see it almost lighting the bottom of the sphere as well, which is, I think, a pretty cool effect. Go to the last scene, we can see that more. Start to bring this radius down. See, it's a really nice effect you get on there. It's almost like the sphere is reflecting the light on the ground. That pretty much covers most of the effects. I'll just do a quick preview of what the rays do, because they are slightly different to the rest of our nodes. So let's reset that. Set our mode to rays. You can see something cool we can do here is if we set the frequency to 0.25, we get an angular wipe across an axis, which could be pretty cool for some transitions or something like that. You can see that we've got an axis here. We can swap that. Currently we're projecting these rays onto the XZ plane. If we click here, they go to the XY plane. Let's move them off a bit so we can see what's happening. And we can also swap them to the YZ plane. Come to the end here. You can see more clearly what's happening. Get some cool stripy effects on the ball. You could even go radial. Bring that frequency way down. And we can get some oscillating waves out of there. Now most of the time that's going to look pretty intense because we're covering the entire scene with it, but based on our map before, we can just map that with the alpha. And now you can give a fall off to that so it's not so hectic. You can see we can offset that. We're getting some cool radial waves. Alright, so hope you enjoy the plugin, hope you can make some cool things with it. Yeah, best of luck.